Hello and welcome to another episode of From the Beginning here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're moving on in Exodus. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 4, so I'll read the first 17 verses and we'll get right into this week's discussion. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." And the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." So here in Exodus chapter 4, we have the continuation of the story of the burning bush and God's instructions and commands to Moses, where he's sending Moses to go help his people Israel and bring them up out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. And we see here that Moses is questioning God. He is not quite confident in his abilities. And if we remember from his past, that's probably for good reason. We know that he left Egypt not on great terms. He murdered an Egyptian, tried to cover it up, and then Pharaoh came after him, and he went and lived in the wilderness. And then now God is sending him back, and he has to confront his past and the problems that are waiting for him there, or that he thinks might be waiting for him there. And he's a little afraid, or at least it seems so, in these verses. We see that he says, "What if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" So he's questioning what he is supposed to say if the people go, "Did you really hear from God? Are you really sure?" And the Lord gives him a great response. He has him throw the staff down on the ground, and it becomes a snake, miraculously. And then he tells him to pick it up, and it becomes a staff once again. So he gives him this amazing, miraculous sign to show that God is with him, that he has given him power. And he says, "This is so that they may believe the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, that he has appeared to you." Once again, God is reminding us who he is, who he's been, and who he always will be. And he goes on and he gives him a second sign. Moses doesn't even have to ask again for it. God just gives him abundantly more. And he says to put his hand inside his cloak. Moses does that, and out comes a hand with leprosy. Probably a very good moment for Moses, because leprosy was very, very serious. And God tells him to put it back inside the cloak, and it comes out a clean hand. It says restored like the rest of his flesh. But God doesn't just stop there. He goes and gives him a third sign and says, even if they don't believe you then maybe they'll believe you if you take some water from the Nile, pour it on the ground, and it will become blood on the ground. And so we see that God is not just answering Moses' question with one answer. He gives him three. He goes above and beyond and gives him, here's 1, 2, 3. Here's 3 proofs for you who are questioning me. Here's what you can do. And so God goes above and beyond and does abundantly more than Moses asks. And that's the same for each and every one of us. We ask God for a sign. We ask him to help in a certain situation. And God does abundantly more than we can ask or imagine. And that's something that's said in the book of Ephesians, where the Apostle Paul is saying that God can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. So we know that the power of God is mighty, and he does more than we ask for. But then we see that even though Moses gets this question answered and he gets these signs given to him to give to the people, he then says to the Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So he's getting into a mode of excuses. He didn't just stop with the questioning. He went further and went to the excuse mode and trying to say, not me, I can't do this. And the Lord asks him a great question. He says, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you and will teach you what to say. And I think most of us as Christians can find ourselves in this passage as Moses, where we are telling the Lord we're not able to speak. We don't know the words to say to share our faith with someone, or to give someone a word of encouragement, or to relay a message that God's given us. And yet, God reminds us, as he reminds Moses in this passage, that he's the one who enables people to speak. He's the one that will teach us what to say. He will help us speak. And so as Christians, we need to remember to rely on God's strength. He's not asking us, and he wasn't asking Moses to do this on his own or on our own. He's going with Moses, and he's going to go with us. We just have to have the obedience to walk that out and to trust and to have that faith in God that he is going to carry out the mission he has for us, and that he will be with us every step of the way, that he's not going to leave us, he's not going to forsake us. But then, even though the Lord responds this way and reassures him, Moses says, pardon your servant, Lord, but please send someone else. Even though he's seen these miraculous signs, even though he's heard God say again and again, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to be with you, he doesn't seem to get it. He asks again, please send someone else. And we see that finally, in verse 14, the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? And so even though God is not pleased with Moses' response, just like he's probably not pleased with our responses when we say we can't do something that he's called us to do, he goes once again, above and beyond and gives Moses some help. He sends him his brother, and he's going to be Moses' mouthpiece, just as Moses is going to tell him the things that he receives from God. And yet he doesn't let Moses get off the hook. Even though he sends him help, and he sends him someone who can help be his voice and give him the speech that Moses thinks that someone else is going to be much better at doing, he still is told that he has to do the signs and perform the signs that God is going to do through him. And he still has to be the one to speak to Aaron, his brother, and to tell the things that God has revealed to him. And so we see that even though Moses is making all these excuses, and even though he asks God to send someone else, God is still saying, nope, I'm sending you. I'm going to give you help along the way. It's not going to be all just you, but you have to do what I've called you to do. And that's the same way in each of our lives. God has a plan and a purpose for each one of us, and it's a very different plan for each one of us. He has a grand plan for our lives that we need to trust him with, that we need to follow him after, that we need to carry out. We need to be faithful to pursue what God has for each one of us and not try to get rid of this responsibility or offload that or unload that to someone else, like Moses tried to do here. It's a great reminder that we need to just be obedient to the Lord, because once again, he doesn't let Moses get off the hook. He still has to do the hard things, and that's the same thing in each of our lives. We have to do the hard things that God has called each one of us to do, no matter how badly we want someone else to do it, or no matter how much we doubt our own strengths or abilities. God wants us to seek him, and he wants to use us in our weaknesses. He wants us to realize that we need to rely wholeheartedly on him. And that's what the Lord teaches Moses throughout this story, that it's not about Moses, it's about God. It's about God doing something to rescue his people. It's his plan that he's going to accomplish through Moses. It's his design, and he's the one who is going to perform these mighty deeds. It's not that Moses is going to go back to Egypt and do these great things or perform these great signs. No, the Lord is going to do them through Moses. And the Lord wants to do great things through each and every one of us. We just have to be obedient and faithful in the little bit that he gives us to do. He's going to do the hard part. He's going to do the heavy lifting, but we have to be able to just be obedient and walk faithfully with him. And that often means facing giant things in our lives, difficult things in our lives, like Moses here. He's facing a very difficult task. He has to go lead his people out of Egypt and go back to the most powerful nation and a Pharaoh who's probably not going to be excited to see Moses and definitely not going to be excited to hear what he has to say. He has to face these giants in his life, yet God is going with him. And that's where I want to leave it off this week, that God is going with us in our lives if we are faithful and obedient to him. Next week, we're going to look at Moses' return to Egypt, and we'll see the start of that story. So join us next time for another episode of From the Beginning here on Heavenward Thinking.